much. As you said, I just returned from Mali. Purpose of the mission was to estimate situation of human rights in the country at large and especially at its north. I have spoken to governmental representatives, President, Prime Minister, all key ministers, but also had opportunity to talk to representatives of civil society. I've talked to displaced persons, to National Commission on Human Rights, to some leading intellectuals. And I visited north of country. It's the town of Mopti. It's a town which is on the border of the rebel-controlled area, town of about 100,000 people, but now about 40,000 registers, displaced persons have poured in the place. There is a military build-up because army wants to prevent the fall of this city. When speaking about situation in the north, I think that the best illustration is that over a third population of north has fled. So it's about 1.5 million of people there. We do not know exactly how many displaced persons are around Mali, but we know that we have registered 40,000 in Mopti and many of them in Bamako and elsewhere. We know that number of refugees are over 100,000 in Mauritania, over 100,000 in Burkina Faso, some 30,000 in Algeria, and about 40,000 in Niger. So situation is very bad. The pattern of human rights violations is changing. During the first phase, we had violations that were related to rebels taking control. They included summary execution of the captured soldiers, instances of looting, of rapes. However, what is new now is that human rights violations are becoming more systematic. It's related to takeover of the radical Islamists. So at the beginning it was MNLA, a nationalist Tuareg organization that was in the lead. Now Islamists, radical Islamists have taken over. We are speaking of Ansar Din, consisting of a majority of Malians. But also we have Mujah, which is, its leadership is foreign, mainly Arab, and they are closely related to Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb, which is also present in the area. They have now imposed an extremist version of Sharia, so population is suffering a number of human rights violations, particularly targeted at women. Everybody is banned from listening to music, from smoking. Women have to be covered, but women are also targeted in sense of restricting their ability to work. I talked to displaced persons who said that they had to fly away because it's for example, a lady was a merchant before a rebel have taken control, and taking into account that she has no family, she cannot sustain herself, she cannot work. We have also some drastic cases of punishment, of disobedience of those imposed restrictions. We have 3 cases of public executions. We have 8 cases of amputations, a number of cases of flogging. However, it is frightening to hear that lists are being compiled of women who are either pregnant or have children and are not married, and we do not know what is going to happen to them. Also, in sense of threats to women, the number of enforced marriages is increasing. The price to buy a wife is less than $1,000, and it's often misused, and after getting out of their families, women and once forcefully married are quite often then by their so-called husbands are married for other men after a very short while, which is in fact then a smoke screen for enforced prostitution and rapes that are taking place. As far as situation in South is concerned, still society is quite divided. Military is recovering after the coup and the unsuccessful attempt of counter-coup. I think it's extremely important that investigations related to some cases of grave human rights violations related to coup or in suppressing counter-coup are successfully finished. There is reliable evidence that 20 persons are still missing, and there are indications that they might have been summarily executed. We have about 30 persons that are now in prison. We had credible allegations of cases of arbitrary detention and of torture. It is very important that these cases are fully investigated and perpetrators brought to justice. It is very important because the government has requested United Nations support to liberation of the North. And as you know, United Nations cannot support security forces that are gravely violating human rights. Now, it is difficult to understand both situation in South and in North without understanding some underlying root causes of instability in the country. And those underlying causes are related to violations of human rights. They are related to the corruption in the country, to misgovernment, and to disrespect of economic and social rights. Although the economic situation of the country was improving, the benefits of such developments were not shared equally. Over half of population is living before $1.25 a day. Speaking of vulnerable group, children are particularly vulnerable in North. There is an attempt to enlist them as child soldiers. There is reliable evidence of many children being enlisted. Their families are paid $600 or a little bit less to enlist children, and I have particularly talked to families who had knowledge about enlisting in Gao town, where Mujar is the enlisting organization. And afterwards, each month, they are receiving extra $400. So taking into account widespread poverty of the country, the temptation is high. I heard from one testimony that children were also involved in learning how to produce improvised explosive devices, and 3 children were injured in an explosion, and one of them stayed maimed. So the situation is hard, it is difficult, both in North and in South. Government of national unity is a step forward, and what is quite needed is for the government to take control over rebel-controlled area and organization of credible election. The sooner those processes are over, the better for the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Evelyn, and then Edie.
How can you have credible elections when more than half the country is under the control the radical Islamists? And secondly, France and others have been pushing for ECOWAS and whoever to train and work with the Mali army to be able to go to the north and clean out the, quote, foreigners or whoever. And you just said that with human rights violations in the south, and they've been there well before that may be one reason that the rebels in the north had such success. That doesn't seem to be in the Security Council discussion.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, 2/3 of country are controlled by rebels, and there is always a dilemma whether first to go for elections and then try to liberate rebel-controlled areas, or first have territorial integrity and then to go for elections. The position of top political leaders, president, prime minister, ministers, as well as majority of civil society actors, is first liberation and then elections. There are some political parties and parts of civil society who would prefer to have elections immediately. However, prevailing attitude is liberation first. Now, concerning training and security sector reform is very much needed. One of the reasons of the mutiny that turned into a coup, it was a simple soldiers' mutiny. What happened in Kati is that soldiers were getting orders to go north, and they refused to do it because they were not well equipped, they were not well organized, and they didn't trust military hierarchy. So they refused to go, and it was not a pre-planned, premeditated coup. It turned into a coup. It's clear that there was something wrong in the country, because altogether, related to coup, we didn't have more than 7 deaths. There was not real fighting. And speaking of the situation in the north, some of my interlocutors say, listen, it was not occupation of north. North was abandoned. It was abandoned because military was not willing to fight rebels because of allegations of corruptions in the army, in the country, and they were withdrawing. In fact, it was Tuareg nationalists that started the movement in north. They were supported by troops coming from Libya, armed troops, and they used the opportunity to advance. But later it was taken over by Islam.